welcome to the first ever episode of the XP Billionaires Podcast. If the experience points were money, we would own a yacht within a yacht. Although I don't know about you guys. I mean, I feel like that's something a snobby rich person would do, and that would totally be my thing. What do you guys think?
I mostly just kind of want to pay off my house at this point.
Okay, fair enough, but you still got like a lot afterwards if you had billions and billions of money or XP or whatever you wanted to. Like,
I don't.
what would you really do?
I would be a hermit with broadband. That's what I'd be.
A
Sorry?
hermit with broadband? Oh
Yeah.
no. Never gonna see Sky again.
Okay, no, that is awesome. I love it. All right. Well, I guess for those of you listening, thanks for tuning in. You guys have probably no idea who we are. So I guess we should kind of talk about that. So what we're trying to do here is we're just here to talk about RPG gaming, RPG-like gaming. That'll be kind of something we explain over the course of this episode. And yeah, we're going to talk about different topics, different styles of RPGs, things we like, things we don't like.
Unpopular opinions.
Yes, you're the monarch of that, aren't you?
I try.
All right. Well, let's get some introductions down the road. My name is Ray Fegrim, and I'm going to be moderating the podcast as we go. Basically, I'll be spending a lot of time posting on our blog, which you can check us out at xpbillionaires.wordpress.com. We're going to post a lot of different musings. The three of us will talk about games we're playing, talking about different
RPG stuff. It's what we do.
Yes, specifically RPG stuff. So next up in line, we have the unpopular opinions expert. We have Sky Knight. How are you doing today?
Oh, good. I'm also the resident graphic designer, so yay, I make logos.
Yes, you're taking care of our logos, and we'll probably be keeping up with a lot of the stuff on the WordPress site, I would guess.
Yeah.
Mostly just keeping us formatted and looking good. That's the whole thing. So we said earlier you are very good with the unpopular opinions. What's your most unpopular opinion?
I don't think very much of Final Fantasy VII.
Fight!
Okay.
Them's fighting words.
That is fair, and definitely some plus and minuses to that. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who hate you. But one can only hope there's people that praise you for it. You never know. I mean, that's always a possibility.
Yeah, most of them are in the Suikoden fandom.
Oh. Fair enough. Awesome. Well, I'm glad to have you on with us and having you as one of the billionaires. Next up, we have the Living Tangent. We have Irene Rogue. How are you doing today?
Pretty good. And just because we're keeping it snobby, I'm drinking my tea with my pinky out.
Oh, that is really, really fancy.
Yeah,
Just-
super
just gonna
fancy.
just rub your nose in it. Yeah, there you go.
Well, not really. It's too hot to rub my nose in, particularly.
No, all right.
But yeah, I'm the, I guess, loudmouth commentator with opinions about literally everything, and I will sometimes try and derail this podcast, whether or not Rafe lets me, is kind of the name of the game. And furthermore, I'm thinking I might start up a Twitch stream for our little channel, so anybody who participates in our podcast can enjoy different RPGs alongside a talkative and gregarious member of the cast. And actually thinking of starting with Residents of Fate for the PC, something that Rafe will be extremely excited about.
Absolutely. I definitely enjoyed that one a lot.
Yeah, they did a 4K port.
Yeah, I did see that. I was actually really bummed because the PS4 release was digital only. They didn't make a physical version of it. I would have loved to have traded in my PS3 copy for an update. I'm definitely a believer in physical media. You know, the more discs and the more collector's editions, you can get, the better, I think. As long as they're not too, horribly expensive.
Oh, totally agree. It's more that just, if I'm going to be streaming, it's much easier to do it from my computer than it is from the PS4. So I'll be trying to snag as many deals as I can, building up my RPG library here as well. Lord knows most of them are over on the console, because there's nothing like a nice comfy couch when you're going to be gaming for,
hours and hours.
Hours, yeah. RPGs. In order to become an XP billionaire, it requires extreme commitment.
No, that's true. I mean, I've got 30 years of gaming under my belt. I figure I started building experience with RPGs in when I was 6 years old. My first RPG was the original Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, as it was for the NES. So all those old times of killing those slimes right up at the beginning, that's always been just a piece of my history. Let's make this interesting too. Like that's my first RPG. Sky, what was your first RPG?
I believe it was Magic Knights Ray Earth for the SNES.
Okay, so yeah, I remember playing that one too. That was obviously it was a fan translation. We never actually got something like that localized, but I remember that it was cute, nice, short to the point, and really followed the story well, if I remember it right.
Yeah, it followed the anime storyline of the first season anyway, point for point, pretty much. But I mean, I started gaming a lot later than you did. I mean, when I was in university, basically. So, I mean, well, that's not entirely accurate. RPG gaming, I started in university. Yeah.
Aw, this guy's just a wee babby XP billionaire.
Hey,
I played
they
a ton of Disgaea, sweetheart.
This is true. Getting Sky Disgaea for their birthday in university was probably the most ingenious and possibly the most evil thing I've ever done, unintentionally. I didn't
that
realize
that
that the next time I saw them in class, I would be told that they had sunk 100 hours into the game I bought them literally a few days ago.
Yeah, and you know what? The way I see it, the fact that you made it to being an XP billionaire with that much of a lag is pretty impressive. So I think you at least deserve some praise for that one.
I suppose we'll give it to the new money.
Oh, I'm
Hey,
the
new money, old money, money is money. That's the way I see it.
all right.
Yeah, you're up. What was your first RPG?
Oh God. Unlike you guys, I don't think I've ever had a SNES, despite being an RPG gamer longer than I think at least Sky. But I does Zelda count? I don't know.
That's a
So
discussion for after this.
yeah, so I'd say my first proper RPG with equipment, stats, leveling up, and all that fun stuff was probably Final Fantasy VII.
Oh, no wonder there's going to be some heated debates going forward.
Yeah, and
This is
I
going to be
will
interesting.
I will fairly admit that some of my love for the game is totally tainted by nostalgia colored, rose colored glasses, but I did quite enjoy that game, and I still remember falling in love with it watching my sitter's oldest son playing it on the TV. I could just sit and watch for hours. And that's when I, begged and pleaded for a PlayStation at the tender age of I think I was 11. Yeah, that sounds about right. I was before 13 because my mother was concerned about the fact that it was rated T for teen.
All right, so now that we've talked about first RPGs, let's make it a bit more interesting. Let's go around the other way. So we'll start with Irene again. What is your favorite RPG, at least so far, or one that you think is probably really really high up there?
Oh God, I knew this was coming, and yet I don't have an answer prepared because I guess I don't generally have an answer for this. It sounds like I'm being equivocal and just choosing not to fall on a side, but I really love so many RPGs that I'd be hard pressed to pick a favorite just off the top of my head. It's usually closer to whatever I've been playing lately. Going back to the ones that I guess I've played over and over again
Mhm.
for multiple platforms. Okami's up there, but that's more in the Zelda-esque style. Tales of the Abyss definitely was one of my favorites. Tales of Symphonia, the Tales games in general. Wow, that's a really difficult question. I don't even have a favorite song, man.
All right, all right. Well, I mean, you gave us a good idea. I mean, at the very least, we've got a favorite series potentially, given that you spouted out quite a few Tales games.
Yeah,
Um,
I've bought them over and over again for different platforms, so clearly I do enjoy them quite a bit. And the characters always really draw me in.
Yeah, no, and I mean that's a good start. I mean that's at least gives us an idea of something that you're really really passionate about. So, we'll go with yeah, that's great. All right, Sky, what about you? I got a feeling I know the answer to this after something you said earlier, but let's hear it.
The original Suikoden. It's not the most polished game in some ways in terms of graphics and even for its time. And God knows there were localization issues, but in terms of story pacing, it's right on the money. A lovely cast. It just really makes you care, and it doesn't drag unnecessarily. You can easily finish it around the 20-hour mark on a first playthrough, and I think I've beaten it in about 15 hours or so in one of my 7 or 8 playthroughs, whatever I'm up to at this point.
No, that's really impressive. That's dedication to a series, and I've played through the series too. I do think they are fantastic. So it's not something I see a lot of people having as like an all-time favorite. So it's nice to see that there is some variety here. So yeah,
Just
no,
to
that's awesome.
just to add, I agree that was an excellent entry into the series, and Gremio probably is one of my favorite characters of all time from that series, just because he's so absolutely adorable. He's useless and terrible, and sometimes you just want to like scream at him to get out of your party, but he's so endearing that it makes it difficult to actually follow through.
Yeah. It's he's hard to hate in a lot of ways.
No, that's awesome. Okay, I guess it's my turn. I'm gonna go with something very, very different. It's an individual game on its own. My favorite game of all time, or my favorite RPG of all time, is a game called Rogue Galaxy for the PS2. It was actually my first really big foray into a sci-fi RPG, and I felt that it was so beautifully designed. You had an entire solar system to explore that, while supposedly space is vast, even having only 5 or 6 planets in that solar system was more than enough to have a lot of variety, a lot of different environments. And the fact that this was back in the days where we're in the PS2 era, and an RPG that vast didn't have loading screens on any of the planets other than for, loading up cutscenes and things like that. Just the exploration, being able to run around, was probably something incredibly well done. Rogue Galaxy did a great job of making that a thing back in an era where it was, I think, fairly difficult to do so. The characters were all wonderful. They all had their own story. They all had their own heart. And Steve the robot is like the ultimate robot, and I will always love him.
Steve is awesome.
Yes, he is. Okay, so we've gotten all of that fun stuff out of the way. So I guess it's time to get into this week's discussion. So, I mean, given that this is a very, very introductory episode, trying to get to know who we are, what we're about, I think one of the biggest things that we should talk about is what we feel defines an RPG for us, because there's a lot of blurring of those lines these days, especially getting into more modern gaming. So I want to open that up. Like, I'll start here. Like for me, an RPG is defined with visible numbers. That's one of the biggest keys for me for a traditional RPG experience. I love having stats, attack stats, magic stats, defense stats, like anything that I can visibly see. It goes back to the pen and paper role playing. Anything where like if I have what could easily just be a character sheet in front of me, I am doing a role playing game. That's really what defines it for me. We were talking about, games like, you were mentioning Zelda earlier, Irene, and while I think they are fantastic in the terms of exploration and role playing as being Link, there are, like, especially with the older series, there wasn't a lot of visible numbers. Yeah, you change weapons, you change gear, things like that. It didn't feel the same.
Yeah, I completely admit that. But to me, I guess maybe it's because I started out with those kinds of games where I feel that, moving into my own personal opinion on this, is that
Mhm.
an RPG is primarily defined by its ability to capture you within the story. So something that has a strong narrative and puts you as the, maybe not protagonist, but like front and center in that narrative. And you don't necessarily need to have a massive decision engine to make it feel like you're engrossed. It's not necessarily to do with the mechanics, but the way that the game is able to pull you in so that you're a part of that world more than you are just, passively watching it. which is maybe that's because I started off playing things like, Banjo-Kazooie and Zelda for the N64. Ocarina of Time was my first Zelda, and I played it over and over and over again. I still remember getting terrified of the first boss in the Great Deku Tree. I just about lost my shit when I was a kid because it was, a giant spider with a giant eye, and it was unhappy, and it was on the ceiling. I actually shut off the console the first time I saw it. I just the boss music started. I saw the boss and noped right out of there. Didn't even attempt it. I was
That's true.
I was 8 at the time, so it left a pretty big impression on me. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Okay. Yeah, no, I vaguely remember this. I played it back when a long time ago. Let's not age myself. Let's not do that. But yeah, no, I remember that being a pretty crazy thing. And they had some very fantastic bosses and boss designs, don't get me wrong, in Ocarina. I admit to that. So for you it's more of a narrative focus for the RPG is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, it's less about the leveling up and stats and stuff like that definitely do define a more traditional RPG, but I tend to, because I grew up with, a huge variety from the Zeldas all the way over to the Baldur's Gates and the Baldur's Gate 2s and Neverwinter Nights and those really old-timey isometric RPGs and Diablo 2, my definition is pretty broad in terms of what constitutes an RPG because when I was growing up, I guess I considered myself primarily an RPG gamer. And yet at the same time, I now realize as an adult, not all of them were RPGs, but it still influenced my definition and my categorization to where I can see those RPG elements in other games. And it depends on whether or not the narrative and the characters are the primary focus or if it's, backdrop. For example, despite there being a massive amount of lore and great character detail and you can really get lost in it, I would not consider a game like Overwatch an RPG because there's no narrative, right?
No, that's totally fair.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that you would embody the heroes and play around in the sandboxes, there are only brief snippets where they get into there's one event a year where they actually get into lore missions where I would consider that to be the closest that game gets to it, but I still wouldn't necessarily consider it an RPG.
No, and
I'd
I
love
agree
to see
with
one.
that.
Blizzard, please make an Overwatch RPG. Oh my god, I will buy 10 copies of that.
My only problem with having a definition that vague is that by that same definition, point and click adventure games and even visual novels also fit that description, and it just makes me wonder if that definition is too loose to be useful.
Oh, I completely agree. I'm just saying from my personal experience, that's kind of how I've interpreted it. I agree that it's everything is now an RPG. Yes, I
Yeah.
can talk about everything. This is good.
Yeah, it's true. By that same
Yeah.
logic, any Mario game could be an RPG.
When in fact there was only maybe one proper Mario RPG, which was Super
No,
Mario RPG, or did they do more than that?
actually, the all the Mario and Luigi games that have come out recently were RPGs, and Paper Mario actually would also be defined as an
Yes.
RPG.
Yes, I played a
So
little bit of that. I'd forgotten about it. It was really
yeah,
cool.
yeah, the Mario and Luigi games that started coming out for the Game Boy Advance and the DS, Superstar Saga, Bowser's Inside Story, they played with RPG elements. They had stats, so they had hit points, they had attack points, that kind of thing. So that mechanically, they were actually very, very well for RPGs. They didn't do nearly as well as the original Super Mario RPG, which I still think was probably the best time they've ever done Mario as a role-playing game. But that's also partly probably because it had Squaresoft influence during its development.
And interestingly enough, it seems that these RPGs that, really break out of the mold for Mario tend to have another company involved, because just as recently as, was it last year, we had Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which is a strategy RPG. It's basically XCOM with a Mario skin on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing about that one is, I got a fair ways into it. I haven't finished it, but the story was only sort of there. So it's a case of can you almost? I don't even almost think of it as an RPG because the story was too thin on the ground.
Perhaps a more strategy game rather than an RPG.
Yeah, and I felt the same way about Massive Chalice too, actually, by Double Fine. Same sort of thing.
I mean, fair enough. This goes to show that like the definition of RPG can be pretty different depending on person to person,
Yeah.
which is both good and bad because it means we're going to have tons of material and tons of things to talk about. And also, hopefully our listeners will be able to see themselves a little bit in our discussion as well when think about their games from a different perspective.
Sure.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's what I'd really like to see, like overall, is just being able to provide different perspectives across the board. That's why I like having the both of you on here with me, because I think there's going to be a lot of differing opinions, and I also I don't think we're going to mouth off at each other fairly much. I think we can do this quite civilly, and hope to show that people, can actually have a discussion and a debate without pointing fingers, calling names, that kind of thing.
Well,
I mean, if you guys want to be playful about it, go right ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I might call you guys names, but it is from a place of love.
That's totally fine. So, okay. So I think that gives us a good idea there. Let's move on to my next question. Like,
cough.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I thought that we kind of got your point across. I'm a terrible human being. Sky, let's hear your perspective for the
I'll
most
be
part.
brief.
You take your time. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
I'm terrible. Remember that.
Yes, he is.
Oh, hey, I get to say that. Don't, sweetie.
Yeah. And there's some of that good-natured riffing. No, I'm kidding. Rafe is really a great person. I couldn't not. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm going to go probably a little stricter than both Rafe and Irene on this. It has to be turn-based most of the time for me, or at least have turn-based elements to it, and either stats or leveling. Basically, some sort of character progression system, whatever form that may take. I think that's really important because, I mean, I hesitate to define it the way Irene does simply because my own background is in point-and-click adventure games. And to me, despite also having a narrative base, they are a very different beast in my mind. So that's kind of how I draw the distinction, is pulling back to, well, what's it based off of? It's based off of the old turn-based tabletop games. So that's where I draw the distinction.
Okay. Now, based on that too, I just want to ask, with the case of some action RPGs that have come out in the past, I mean, where do you stand in that regard? Like games like the Dot Hack series, for example. I know those are ones that we've talked about playing in the past.
Dark Souls. Can't forget Dark Souls with the heavy stat focus, heavy leveling focus, and yet definitely a punishing action combat system.
It depends what other elements are in play. Like if it's heavy on the character customization, I'm more comfortable calling it an RPG. And things like Dot Hack, for instance, still have a lot of menu manipulation and pausing of the action going on, right? So, I mean, for me to call something, I look at action RPGs and I evaluate. Most of the time I see something turn-based, I can pretty safely go, oh yeah, that's an RPG. Action games with some sort of RPG element, I hum and haw a bit.
Okay, no, and that's fair. I was just kind of curious in that respect, just because, like I deem the Dot Hack games definitely RPGs in that regard, and I can think of a couple of other games in my mind that kind of have that same feel. But no, that's a really good perspective, and that's something we can kind of discuss in a future episode too. That was one of the things I was thinking about. Turn based over action based. That'd be an interesting topic.
And you're seeing the lines between those two blurring a lot more. I mean, look at Final Fantasy 15. It's an action RPG. They've taken Final Fantasy out of its, traditional turn-based format, but to say that it's not an RPG, I don't think is necessarily up for debate. It's definitely in the genre, but it's not turn-based like it normally one would expect from the Final Fantasy series.
Right. No, exactly. It's like I said, the real line in the sand really is more around character customization, leveling, stats, that element to it. I do think the sort of pure form is turn-based simply because of the control element. You have far more control over things going on when it's turn-based. But yeah, I'll flesh out thoughts in a later episode, I guess.
No, and absolutely. Like, this really is just kind of giving us a really, really, start with a broad perspective, and we can narrow it down as we go. I think that was great. Thank you. And again, sorry for completely forgetting about you. So now, have I forgotten anybody?
You've forgotten the podcast ghost. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, Ghost, do you want to chime in?
No. Ghost has run away.
Okay, all right.
He decided to go pet my cat.
All right. So, like we were talking about, like, as it's clear that the lines have been blurring, especially over the last even 10, even 15 years. Who's the bigger culprit of blurring the lines? Are we talking JRPGs or Western RPGs?
I would have to say Western for sure, because the JRPG formula is still pretty much unscathed from the days of the old Final Fantasy sevens and and Dragon Warrior games, because you can still find games like that still find massive success even in the West, like Octopath Traveler that just came out, right? It's a classic JRPG. The West, I think, has had a bigger role in terms of blurring those lines a little more, because the term RPG wasn't really synonymous with a ton of games made in the West. And when they were, the isometric, top-down, Baldur's Gate style RPGs.
It was more a PC gaming phenomenon, really.
Oh, yeah.
Originally.
Yeah, and it might just be because, the West didn't necessarily have as big a foothold as it does today in the console scene. And, all the consoles way back when were entirely Japanese constructs, right? Yes. So I think for sure it's a back and forth, because on the one hand, the JRPG formula is completely untouched, but on the other hand, you have studios like From Software in Japan doing stuff like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, which definitely take more of an action combat route, which is something you're more used to seeing definitely a change up from the Japanese formula that would take some of that action combat away from some of the more Western role-playing games, like the Diablos of the world, where everything is like, even with Baldur's Gate, like, you could pause the action, but it was like, turn, 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 turn. So it was very much almost a precursor to an action game where you would have to manually pause the battle in order to input commands, but the battle would go on whether or not you did anything. So those action elements, I think, slowly seeped in over time, and now we've got a blending of it. You get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah. I think you're more or less on point here. I have less experience with much less experience with Western RPGs, but I think you've got the gist of it here.
Yeah, and especially when they're trying to blend genres these days. Like, you think of games like Fallout and Borderlands that are giving you,
Mass Effect.
while they're in Mass Effect, yes, where, while there's not necessarily stat points in terms of numerical values, like, any of the increases you do when you're customizing are more percentage based. And that still kind of works for me in terms of, like, in terms of mechanically defining an RPG.
Yeah, and in the case of something like Borderlands, it's not necessarily a percentage, it's more of skills, like building your skills tree, right? So what do you want your character to be good at? And it's definitely, like, you can't have, and I was a little miffed when I found this out, because I like all the skills so much. You can't have all of them. So you have to create a build that will, work in the late game stages, which is a bit of a challenge, especially when you start getting into the true Vault Hunter mode difficulties, where you get one shot at a lot.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. Sky, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm good. Shall
All right.
we wrap it up or?
Yeah, I think we're good for our inaugural episode. Wow, I know words apparently.
It'll come out in the edit. Don't worry.
Well, we'll see how well I can do that. Yeah, well, I mean, there's going to be a lot of pauses. I think I'm going to work on, but yeah, we'll see how that goes. But okay, so we're at the end. So I want to thank everybody for listening. We're all available on Twitter. You can find me. You can either search for Ray Fegrim, or my Twitter handle is at billionaires XP, all one word. Sky, where can we find you?
Can I remember my Twitter handle off the top of my head? No, I cannot. Hold on a sec.
Okay, I'll go first then. My Twitter handle is, you can find me at irogue_XP. That's kind of the way I'm going to brand everything, is like small I, big rogue _XP. And hopefully that'll, help amalgamate everything. And if and when I do eventually start that Twitch stream, I'll use the same name so people can find me easily.
Sky, how about you? Have you figured it out?
Yeah, I'm at Sky Knight XP on Twitter, where you can find me currently mostly ranting about how wonderful Torment Tides of Numenera is.
All right, sounds good. On our Twitter feeds, and as well as on our page, again, xpbillionaires.wordpress.com, you'll be able to buy us a coffee if you like what you're listening to and you want to keep hearing more. Every coffee you buy keeps us awake to earn more and more experience. So keep listening, and we will see you next week. All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.